Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Business and Philanthropy Climate Forum plenary room. My name is Tanya Habimana, and I will be your MC for this morning. Now, on a day-to-day basis, I cover capital markets, financial movements, business, and the economy in Africa. Now, Africa, part of the global south as we know it, is home to many of the world's most vulnerable nations to climate change. Nations that, as we also know, are also those most unlikely to be able to carry the financial cost burden that comes with the devastating effects of climate change. From droughts, floods to earthquakes, this next conversation is all about this. Introducing the session on securing the financial future of climate vulnerable nations. Now, last year, COP27 made way for a groundbreaking conclusion: loss and damage. But loss and damage has no silver bullet. It is required that we take action in a concerted effort, complementary effects that we all put together. This next session looks at a breakthrough study where we will discover the findings that look at how we can transfer the financial burdens of climate risks from the global south to international risk markets. Losses for the most extreme weather events could be capped at a groundbreaking 10% of GDP. It is my honor to introduce to you our speakers, Mr. David Howden, CEO at Howden, Ms. Mami Mizutori, UN Assistant Secretary General and Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction at the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, Mr. Yoshihiro Kawai, Chairman of the Southeast Asia Disaster Risk Insurance Facility, Ms. Ana Gonzalez Pelaez, Fellow of the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, and your moderator for this session, Mr. John Neal, CEO of Lloyd's of London. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving them a warm round of applause.
Right, morning everyone. I don't think it's a silver bullet, I think it's a golden bullet, and we're going to try and explain why it's a golden bullet in just a moment. So I think very kindly, I don't need to make the introductions as the introductions have been meant, and you've got a fantastic panel sat in front of you here. This has become a very topical subject, particularly in the last 24 hours, so I think today's discussion is really, really well timed. But I might ask Anna just to kick us off and just give us a bit of a flavour of the study which you're the author of, please.
Thank you so much, John, and also to the whole SMI team for arranging this wonderful panel, and also to all of you for your time. And I would like also to give a shout out to Her Excellency Razan, who was with us all the way throughout the making of this study, and very much a supporter and real strength to us. So earlier this year, in a conversation about loss and damage, David Howden, who we have here in our panel, asked the question: has anyone actually modeled the risks to these countries, to climate vulnerable countries, and calculated how much is needed to protect them? And it's a very obvious question, but remarkably the answer was no, in terms of metrics that both the risk capital markets and climate policymakers would be able to use. So the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership gathered together a team to do this. We have Sid Miller here, who leads ClimateWise, building on our trajectory of research collaborations with the insurance industry since the year 2000. And I would like also to acknowledge my co-authors, our very senior advisory board of experts from a range of institutions, as well as an enormous operation involving almost 100 people of experts from various backgrounds evolving an idea about protecting countries' GDPs that emerged in conversations in the Resilience Hub during COP27 last year among Rowan Douglas, Nate Matthews, I know you are here in the audience, and Jorge Castellumendi. So we have undertaken two major innovations. One, quantifying climate risk to national economies, and the other innovation, calculating how much it would cost to protect those economies. For the first time at this scale, we assessed the current and future climate risks to the economies of a small group of vulnerable Caribbean, Indian, and Pacific Oceans countries using risk capital markets analytics. And we have a slide now. I think, Laura, you're going to help us, yes? Thank you so much. Yes, it's just, I won't stop long, but it's just to show you the magnitude of the quantification that we have done. These countries that we have assessed face losing between 50% and over 100% of their GDP from climate-related disasters. And this is set to grow in 10 to 15% by 2050. And I would like to point your attention as well to much larger figures than 100% that you see at the extreme end. Some countries risk losing almost 200% or even 300%. And I know these extremes seem impossible, but it did happen, for example, to Dominica in 2017. So once we knew what the risk was, we worked with Howden on the second major breakthrough of this study, demonstrating what it would cost to protect these economies. We first calculated what it would cost to protect the entire economies of these 11 countries from losing more than 10% of GDP from climate shocks through an insurance mechanism called umbrella stop loss, so where defined losses above a certain threshold are protected by prearranged financing. And this is the first time that it has been done to national economies, and we didn't even know if it was going to be possible. And if it was going to be possible, we didn't even know what the threshold was going to be. We started this exercise thinking maybe protecting above 30% will already be a big achievement. So the fact that we have managed to bring the numbers down to protecting these countries above 10% is a massive breakthrough of this study. And I would like to show you now the second graphic. Yes, so here you can see the small orange slivers at the top of each bar is the amount that would be needed to be paid annually in pure premium terms for each country. And the larger blue bars, they are the financial protection that pure premium unlocks from the risk capital markets. So the bars are in different heights just to account for the different sizes of these countries and these economies. The key thing is that economically, the outcome for each of these diverse countries is the same. They are protected to lose no more than 10% of their GDP. The total estimated cost of doing so is approximately 300 million pure premium across the 11 countries, which unlocks a protection of $25 billion. We then looked at scaling up this approach and capping losses at 10% of GDP to the 30 smallest, most vulnerable countries under 1 million population in the world, 30 in total. And we found that approximately $1 billion could unlock $75 billion from the risk capital markets in contractual guarantees to these countries for when disaster happens. 1 billion is just 1% of the annual 100 billion target that is being negotiated currently for the loss and damage fund and that already yesterday had some major breakthroughs. So this protection would transform the prospects of these countries, providing the immediate financial security needed to attract investment, to adapt, to reduce sovereign debt costs, and protect exposed communities, businesses, and ecosystems. So I'm going to leave it for now. Leave it here for now. Back to you, John.
Anna, thank you very much. I mean, it sounds remarkable, doesn't it, when you think how long we've been talking about loss and damage to get to a point where a capital markets plan caps extreme weather events at 10% of GDP of these countries. It just sounds quite staggering, doesn't it? So I'm going to turn to Mami, because there's a little bit of pressure the other way around, isn't there? When you look at small island development states and we look at least developed countries, how are they going to be able to present the risk framework and the risk consideration that allows this plan to be activated?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you, Anna, for putting this report together, because it's really, I think, revolutionary in the sense that for the first time, as you say, you're quantifying the risk of these vulnerable countries. And it's a combination of not only the hazards, the climate-related ones that we're discussing here in Dubai, but plus the vulnerability and the exposure. And unless you bring all these things together, you cannot quantify what is the risk that these countries are facing. And many times, to be honest, climate adaptation is discussed or even implemented without looking into those vulnerability factors, which is so crucial. So I think with what you've done here, we understand clearly what we need to do. And when I say we, I think that's the big part, right? Loss and damage fund. Yesterday, the operationalization was agreed. And as you say in this report, there needs to be a mosaic of different ways of implementing this. So it's all hands on the deck. You know, it's of course, the public sector, but the private sector and the civil society. And we know that for many decades, centuries actually, that the insurance industry has been the one at the core of protection of these vulnerable countries. And now we know what needs to be protected. Now, I think, the case of these SIDS and LDCs, and during my 6 years in my job, I've been to many of these countries. And most recently, I was in Tonga and Fiji. And you really see that they are totally vulnerable in the sense that it's not only about now or what they lost, but when you look about what do they have in order to develop, it's not very promising as of now. Like Tonga, which you saw last year, it was hit at the same time during COVID by a underwater volcanic eruption, which led to a tsunami and then a hurricane. And when I went there more than a year after, the coast, which was devastated by the tsunami, was still like that. So, as you said, Anna, in case of the economic loss, the absolute numbers are the highest in developed countries, but relative numbers, it's high in these places, and many times they never recover. But we need to change that. And that's why I think that, it's important that you have this study. The challenge for these countries is that they need to really demonstrate that they can put together climate adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and development policies together. And they need to show that they can use the money now with the loss and damage fund to have an impact. And for that, they also need not only these kind of schemes, but capacity building. The difficulty is that they were all saying in Tonga and Fiji, we keep on building the capacity of people, but then they go away to Australia to pick fruits instead of staying in the country and working in the Met service or working in the Hydromet service. So I think, the real challenge for all of us is how can we bring together all the different stakeholders to fill the gaps that these countries need in order to keep on developing. But I must really say that your study, Anna, and what you're proposing here shows that the insurance sector can now move from risk transfer to risk sharing. And I think in that way, your industry can really be an industry which can be innovative and promising in the sense of enhancing the shock observance capacity of these vulnerable countries.
Mami, thank you. The Tonga example is a good one. Tonga's lost its GDP twice in its entirety in the last 7 years, so it's a good worked example. David, I'm now going to really pick on you because you commissioned the report. You know, we've now got a solution that we can activate. In the last 24 hours, there's a suggestion the money might be available. So how do we actually move, in Brian Moynihan's challenge as our chair of the Sustainable Markets, how do we move from talking about the solution to actually activating it and putting it in place?
Yeah, it's a very good point there, John, because I think, one of the things about bringing, the community together, the business community, is to do things and actually, actioning it. And I remember when I first heard about loss and damage, conceptually, I thought, isn't that our industry? Where can we play a part? And so we wanted to work out how we do play that part. And it starts actually, of course, by the question I asked of, does anyone know what the exposure will be from climate change? Well, what are we talking about? Because until you've measured something, you can't decide how you're actually going to deal with it. So that bit's been done really well by Anne and the team. And just picking up on something Mami is saying there, this really is quite revolutionary. It's quite new. This isn't insurance in the way that you and John and I know about it. This is a contractual guarantee for pre-agreed finance. Very, very contractual guarantee for pre-agreed finance. So it's not just actually about providing finance for disaster relief post-disaster, but it's also, to your point, Mami, providing certainty around investment. So either the country or you investors who want to invest in the country know that if the disaster happens, there's pre-agreed finance available to be spent by that island or that country in order to get itself back on its feet. That is really new. So it isn't just about the disaster. It's actually about sustainability. If you just look one example, you think that there's so many going on at the moment. You think about Pakistan, amazingly, the UN raised $9 billion in January of this year following the terrible floods in Pakistan. An enormous achievement. But it was months after the floods had happened. Just imagine if instead of that, as the floods were actually happening, pre-agreed financing with a contractual guarantee had been in place and Pakistan had been able to access that 9 billion prior to the floods actually happening. It isn't so much my world, but it's a well-known fact, I think, that actually about $1 done before the disaster happens is worth 6 after. So really hold that in mind. Pre-agreed contractual. Secondly, if you look at this, the world isn't getting any necessarily, any less. Climate change is happening. What we're trying to do here is say, okay, climate change is going to get worse. Climate change disasters are going to get worse, but there's no need for the countries who are affected by that for their financial position to get worse. We've got a solution. We've got a way, and what happened in the past was no one could pay. Everyone thought, well, maybe there's an answer, but there wasn't a fund. Now we have the Loss and Damage Fund. And as Anna said, a very small part of that, John, small part, most can be used for all the DRR that's needed elsewhere, can be used to provide this cap of 10% of GDP. That's going to be an enormous value. You think about the billions of people who really, when a disaster happens, have nothing. They don't just lose their home, they lose their livelihood, they lose everything. And on top of that, many of these countries can't get their infrastructure back. So if you're a hotel, if you're a Hyatt hotel or something, maybe your hotel's insured, but what's the good of the hotel if there's no airport and there's no hospital or there's no roads, This provides for sustainability of the country and therefore allows more investment to go into the country, both pre the disaster, because of confidence in it, and post it. So really want to think about this as a sort of double link. And the final point I'd like to make really is one around, if you look at the way that the 10% is capped, with a premium, this is about providing protection across the board around GDP. We are not insuring assets here. And this is a critical point. The money is for the country or the island to spend as they wish or get themselves back. It's not about a building. This is protecting GDP. And that's really revolutionary, John.
For those of you in insurance, this is insurance, but not as you know it, as has just been explained there. So it's very different. Yoshi, I might turn to you because you've had such an involvement with disaster risk insurance and the related relief that sits there. So I think it'd be interesting to know what actually works today and whether what you're hearing and what's in the report moves the dial. Does it make the change that we're talking about?
Yeah, thank you, John, and thank you, everybody. Just following what we have discussed so far, Anna mentioned small amount of premium support has a huge change in the vulnerable countries. And Mami mentioned that, like example of Tonga and Fiji, you know, without such a support, it's a huge disaster which lasted quite a long period of time, particularly those vulnerable states. And David mentioned pre-arranged finance change this whole perspective. And key question here, who take action? Who take action in following this argument? And my organization, CDRIF, Southeast Asia Disaster Risk Insurance Facility, and also our colleagues, or regional risk pooling, is very much implementation body to make something change happen. Because before joining this CDRIF, I worked for international insurance regulatory community for 15 years, creating international insurance rules of the game. And it's a huge amount of negotiation between the regulators around the world and created very solid standards. The most challenging part in that experience is not setting standards. It's maybe 10% of the whole 100% job. The most important challenging part is implementation of the standards. To make change happen, put that standards into practice. And this is exactly the same in this field. To make change happen, somebody should implement based on the good theory and Anna's report and so on. So CDRIF, for example, just in August, huge flood happened in Laos, and CDRIF paid within 1 day, immediate cash, and 1.5 million. It's a small amount, but it's a huge change for Laos community. And this is our implementation body, and not only CDRIF, but our colleagues in the regional risk pool. There is a risk pool in Africa region, Caribbean, Pacific. All we do the same. For example, CDRIF that I know best, we have population-wise, it's 650 million. It's a huge amount of people. And the economy size is $4 trillion. And in this economy, for example, last year, we have huge disaster, not only hurricane, typhoon, but the drought and so on. 50 million people are affected. And almost 5% are insured on this loss. In other words, it's a huge, huge gap. And what we have a strategy, through the government, we just channel through the government and pay out those people and society. That makes a huge change. One thing that when we work in this practice in the field, the challenge is how to work with the government. And when you industry talk with the government, you might have difficulty who is talking with, and first of all to understand what insurance is, and why insurance is important. But us, like our regional risk pool, we are intergovernmental organization. So we are sort of, our shareholders, we are owned by government. So we are conduit for your business to do this, to provide protection. And of course, we have a huge opportunity and challenge. And definitely, we would like to work, all of you, particularly industry, as well as international organization, to make change happen. And that's where we exist. And this occasion is definitely, we would like to emphasize the role of regional risk pool to take action and make change happen.
Yoshi, thank you very much. And just thinking of your slides from earlier on, really, I think everybody was looking at those slides and the scary numbers on there, particularly Barbados and Fiji, which really stood out, didn't they? Just so you've looked at certain countries. How scalable do you think this solution is? Is it applicable across the board? Do you think it's a universal solution that you've presented and you've studied?
Well, in our study, we have done two things. So one was the first quantification that I just presented, that was specifically about those 11 countries with populations under 1 million and scalable to the 30 countries in the world that have the same type of features. And that's when we can confidently say 1 billion of pure premium protection to those countries would unlock 75 billion of guaranteed contractual pre-finance arrangements. Then, as a second part of the analysis, we have done, okay, loss and damage is a large realm of countries, so probably about 100. As loss and damage negotiations progress, all these countries should also be considered, and we explore and quantified, okay, 10 million, if we start by 10 million of pure premium from loss and damage funds to be given to each country in the loss and damage domain, how much protection that could give those countries, crucially for their most immediate urgent needs, and each country could decide. But we did the quantification for frequent risks in this case. So in this case, we were not specifically looking at protecting GDP, but at protecting immediate priorities. The quantification we obtained on that is that 10 million would provide between 200 and 300 million dollars of risk capital markets protection guarantees to these countries for the defined priorities that they would put. And then it's up to the countries as well on how they want to use that on recovering critical infrastructure, schools, hospitals, humanitarian need, nature, natural assets, sovereign debt repayments. So the variety is large and is up to the country. This is, of course, 10 million is not enough to cover all the needs that there are in these countries, but it would be sufficient to start to create immediately a global loss and damage risk-sharing mechanisms that all countries form part of it, and then is ready to scale as negotiations progress and as more funds become available.
That's good, isn't it? So it's good to hear. So the solution's not limited to the countries in the study. It's entirely adaptable. Mami, it was interesting. In the last 24 hours, there's been some talk of loss and damage and some agreement on funding. It might be worth just giving an update from a UN perspective as to where you think that conversation's got to and where we can go from here.
Right. So at the last COP, as you know, there was an agreement to create a fund. And that was a big breakthrough because not many people thought that it was possible. But then that agreement was made, and then throughout this year, there were, I think, at the end, 5 what we call transitional committee meetings where member states sat together and talked about, okay, how do we operationalize this fund? And it was about many things, including who is going to manage this fund, how much money do we need for the fund to start. And as you know, World Bank has been now agreed as the ad interim body to manage, and this is something that World Bank has not done before. So they're going to create something different from their existing body. And also, World Bank said that they needed $200 million to start the loss and damage fund operationalization. It seems that as of now, $400 million has been committed. So I think this is a great start. Although, of course, if you think of the magnitude of what amount of money you need, we still need a lot to get there. But I think, and that was agreed yesterday that, yes, we will operationalize this. But as Yoshi said, now, how do we implement this? Because there are other funds in this world. Like we talk a lot about the Green Climate Fund, and which we there's always
meeting. I was like thinking.
okay.
It's like
I think somebody wants to join our conversation from outside.
Someone's come in, don't you, Mami?
Because it's so interesting. But anyway, the Green Climate Fund was set up for a good reason, but there is a lot of discussion, and let's be transparent. concerns from developing countries saying it is impossible to access these funds. So we can't make this fund something like that. We need to have many different, and that's where I think the mosaic comes in, many different stakeholders to come to use this fund, and many different innovative ways to use this fund. That's where we are right now. And I do believe that it's not going to be easy, but definitely we need what we always talk about as public-private partnership. And Yoshi, you made the very important point of who's going to start talking with who. I mean, I think that needs to start now, because right now people are rejoicing that the fund is going to be operationalized. If it's not going to be implemented quickly, the disappointment will come in very quickly. And what's going to happen is that in your report, Anna, you say that currently these countries are insurable by until 2050. But if we don't act now, I'm afraid that they will become uninsurable very quickly. So I think that's where we are.
Sure. Yoshi and David, I'm going to ask you the same question, but Yoshi, I might go to you first. So if we think about operationalizing the solution, if there is some money available, from your experience with the many interests that you've been involved in, including sovereign funds and others, how would you go about operationalizing the solution to get to a point where there is risk financing and a form of insurance in place?
Key issue, or just as an implementation body and following what we have discussed, is definitely communication, collaboration with the government, policy makers. Top level of ministers, they fully agree and understand the importance of funding and support politically. But when we talk with the, technocrats, or just, to talk with them, it takes time, or first of all, to understand why insurance is so valuable. Pre-finance is so critically important, cost efficient, not only for people, but also government budget. So definitely, once we just share ownership of the importance of insurance, that conversation goes much quicker and faster. So the key issue is how to communicate key stakeholders, particularly policymakers, and make them buy in. And definitely, us, CDRIF, and other regional pools have a huge advantage vis-a-vis other industry players. Definitely, we do not compete industry players. We just ensure, communicate with the government people, make it sure that this is very beneficial for them, and then we reinsure or arrange sharing or risk with private sector. So definitely, we take a role, and we definitely do conversation clearly, and this loss and damage funding is extremely supportive from our work, more sort of scalable. And definitely we would like to work with government policymakers and industry as a conduit to make something good happen.
Yeah. Thank you, Yoshi. I mean, David, we kind of know, don't we, that if we put the solution in practice and show how the money moves and how a loss actually gets made, the evidence is very compelling, isn't it, in terms of turning the sort of the theory into practice. So if you're heading away from COP, where are you going to go first to evidence that this solution can work?
Can work, yeah. Well, I think that's right. I mean, as we said earlier, John, it starts with understanding what the issue is, and we now understand what the issue is, in terms of the risk, and the profile of it, and then understanding actually how we can price it. And actually, the price of security to me is everything. And actually, we have been able to price it, and as it's been demonstrated, it isn't that expensive to give that, and no one knows what the next vulnerable state, nation, island will be. And if this was in place, the next time it happens, actually the funding, the pro-grid funding would be in place. So I think action is key. So I think there's three things that we need to really do. The first is, like always, is bring a broker is engage with the clients, and the clients here are the vulnerable countries, and get them to tell us what they need, how it would work, etc. So that they say, yes, this is something that would make a real difference. This is something that would help us bring investment in. This would something that would help us, empower us, give us agency as countries. And I really think it would. I think if you think about it, these are the sort of products that the global north has used day in, day out for centuries now, and haven't been available to the global south. So I think that's the first place. place, John. Secondly, I think, as Yoshi and Mam is going, it is obviously engaging with the donors who are going to put into the loss and damage to actually say, if you want this to action fast, this is a great way. What better way to do something? Wouldn't we all love to walk away from COP28 having said we've come up with a solution for protecting all vulnerable countries from more than a loss of 10% of their GDP? What a massive COP28 win that would be, yeah? Why couldn't we do that? We could achieve that, you know? So that's the second thing. The third thing, I think, there's CEOs here, there'll be CEOs. I think we need to engage with the business community. Again, the business community uses these instruments continuously to smooth their businesses, protect the investments they make. And I think that linkage between public and private is very important here, because what we want the business to say is, you know what? If there was protection, in these vulnerable countries, we would invest more money. Because if they start saying we're going to invest more money as business and we're going to see capital flow into those countries, then I think that's a win. So I would say to the business leaders here, please get behind this. Yeah, because I know, look, many of you are my clients, and you won't build anything, you won't fly anything unless it's insured. So don't let the global south suffer when you're not.
Thanks, David. And I'm just thinking that through, thinking of the way in which you put the report together. David's saying engage with the countries at risk. Do you think through the report you've created a framework where their risk can be presented? So if the risk is presented, then finance and insurance ought to be more readily available. Is there a framework coming out of the report that's very usable?
Well, the good thing about this, two things. The report, the study, the initiative that Cambridge has been leading around it has involved, as I mentioned at the beginning, at least 100 people, if not more. And of those as well as insurance industry, we engage with Global South, Global North, governments, donors, recipients, risk pools, a range of institutions. And so definitely continuing, it was developed already with those partners, and continuing and amplifying all those different categories of partners is definitely crucial. This is just something to build on and to expand and to take much further and into action. And then the second thing I would like to insist on, like we keep hearing, don't bring new initiatives to COP, that there is an initiative fatigue, yes? This is not a new initiative. All the institutions that are required to implement this are already in place. We have the risk pools, we have the United Nations agencies relevant, we have the development banks, the insurance industry, the academic partners. It's just all the institutions are already there. These kind of principles have already been put in place. They are already, like we have Yoshi here representing the risk pools. It's just, this already exists. What we are presenting is new figures to marry the world of what the advancements that have already taken in this space of disaster risk financing with the loss and damage funding negotiations. By bringing these two together, the scale and the scope of protection for vulnerable countries is unprecedented. So that's the key difference. We don't bring a new initiative. We have all the institutions. We are ready to implement. We bring a revolution of thinking to be able to do this.
So just, Yoshi and Mami, I was going to ask you. So if Anna's telling us the risk frameworks are really quite well understood and they're now credible in terms of creating a measurement, and David's very bullish about the private interest that should be there, how do we join public and private together? It almost feels awkward when we talk about public and private partnership. We need to come up with a different name, don't we, to try and move things along. But what do we need to do? What would your advice be as to how do we connect the interest here to get, who do we speak to from a public point of view? Where do we go now?
So if I may start. So I've been working with the members of the Insurance Development Forum for quite a few years. And this is a forum where the major insurance companies of US, Europe, and plus come together to discuss, how can the insurance industry be your role more enhanced as a public good. And I think this is a really good place where we are already talking about how can the protection gap of the most vulnerable countries be narrowed, how can disaster risk reduction, i.e. prevention, be more mainstreamed in the industry, etc. But I think, one thing that probably we need to do, and you've been asking about this, how to scale things up. And I think, an initiative like this can really scale things up because it's the same with the United Nations system too. We have a lot of beautiful small pilot projects in many places, but always the challenge is how can this be scaled up? And I do believe that using a forum like the Insurance Development Forum would be, because already there you have the World Bank in there, you have UNDP there, we are in there too. So it's already a body that can work as building that. And I agree with you. Maybe we should change the PPP name and make it something more fresh and attractive. But it could work.
One thing that, yes, totally echo what the Mami mentioned, scale up is a critically important. And just having heard what Anna mentioned, this is the moment that we just, scale up. Because, huge movement support was loss and damage. Now fund is created, and now, we can move on. And what is needed is for me, or for you in this room, you share this, this is existential issue for insurance. If we do not take action, what we are doing for? Our mandate is to provide protection to the society and people. If we do not take action now, what does we do, for the society? And now there is a support, and this voice is not totally communicated clearly around the world. In this room, yes, but we should speak out. Industry, government, policymakers, we should unite, and to speak out, we have to take action now and scale up. It's extremely important for our industry, and it's an opportunity for our industry to contribute to the society. Some people just criticize our industry. Our industry is just, set the price and avoid the risk. Our industry's mandate is just assess the risk and find a solution. And find the solution is various ways, like Mami did. If we do a lot of ex-ante arrangement, we have avoid the risk materialization, which also make it easier to provide insurance. That's a huge issue that we should focus on. And risk assessment, some people say that we have no data. We don't communicate with those emerging markets and so on. Data collection, we can do a lot, modeling and so on. All these issues we have to do one by one, and now it's scale up. If we scale up and our industry buy-in, policymakers buy-in, and everybody buy-in, we can do much, much better job. And that is what us, insurance industry and policymaker, have to make it happen now.
Yeah, John, if I may build on what Yoshi just said, because he says this is a very just good moment to also give a nod to the risk modelers in our study. So our academic partners have been from the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology in Germany, from the University of Adelaide, and Risk Layer. And they have proven how the insurance industry, or the methodologies that the insurance industry uses of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability are ready, and they are ready to be scaled up. We proved it here. Entire economies' risks from very vulnerable countries can be measured already. Of course, now and up to 2050, and beyond, probably. We've stopped at 2050 because we had a COP to deliver for. But it's just, of course, there are challenges to solve. But it's just, if we just stop and waste our time admiring the challenges, we won't make the shift progress we need right now. And this has proven that the tools are already there.
And just maybe I go, you know, what is important now is public-private partnership. We say it, definitely risk have a price. We cannot do it, you know, for service. Risk is a price, so we have to assess the price. And also blended finance is a term that, you know, we use different terms. But definitely public side should support, and definitely now loss and damage provide funding. So we have to set that structure and make is, you know, blended finance work. That's, I think, we should focus now.
I think we've got a little bit of time left, so I think it genuinely is an exciting moment to have talked so much about this subject. And I think, as the panel have said, we now know the money at the start's available. As Anna's just been telling us, the modelling and the modelling methodologies are tried and tested, and there is a definitive pathway there to allow, to David's challenge, to sort of hit the button for risk financing and insurance to be applied. So the panel feels, I think, very bullish about the solution that's being presented. But I might just throw the questions open to the room. What do you feel? What have you heard? How does that resonate with you? Is there anything you'd like to hear more of, or is there any particular question that I've not asked that you'd like to ask one of the panelists? I think we've got some mics that are doing the rounds. Question at the front, if that's...
There's a mic here.
Don't throw it. Might need turning on.
Turn it on.
Progress. Thank you. Sorry, my name is Justin Mundy, and I work with Howden. I've worked with Anna and Rowan Douglas, also set up the IDF. But also I chair something called the Sustainability-Linked Sovereign Debt Hub as well, which has a whole range of IFIs on its board. And I just, if I may, make, it's not so much questions, two quick additional points, just to emphasize the gravity and the seriousness of this opportunity. The first is, David mentioned Pakistan. Well, the pledging conference for Pakistan was this January, which was 2.5 months after the catastrophe. The money was pledged. It has yet to arrive. And the opportunity cost of that non-arrival, not only in terms of nutrition, humanitarian issues, insecurity, financial insecurity, and political insecurity, is very considerable. So getting this right and moving it quickly hits an awful lot of other points, which otherwise would be massively exacerbated by us continuing as business as usual. Secondly, the link, Anna referenced it, but the link here to what this could do, because this has the benefit of being practical and reasonably cheap and actually efficient. And it also has the ability to link in some of the other broader conversations going on at the moment around sovereign debt and key performance indicators. And some of us, with the UN, Mahmoud, and trying to put in place a structure where we can build a virtuous circle by ensuring that climate risk is identified and policies put in place to augment it, brings down the perception of risk in a country, thereby reduces the cost of capital, thereby increases investment, to David's point. The trouble is, unless we do this sort of approach, we don't have that virtuous circle. If we don't have that virtuous circle, we don't have... What we do know is there is not enough public sector finance around, and it relies upon the private sector, which isn't going to flow unless we do this all together in an integrated way. So I think this is a phenomenally important thing that you're doing. I think it's phenomenally important, not only in IVOD itself, because of the broader ramifications of linking it into both the macro finance, but also the implementation of measures on the ground to significantly reduce the political and economic insecurity which comes from it. And last point, having been to Grenada after it had its catastrophic, lost 250% of its GDP overnight, Grenada, and then wearing another hat, I went to the Caribbean just after the hurricanes there a few years ago. 3 years later, work hasn't started. 4 years later, work hasn't started. And we have a real issue here. So thank you all for what you're doing.
Oh, Mike, this is I'm going to pick on Sid Miller at the front. This is an unfair parallel because Sid ran the New Zealand Earthquake Commission. Earthquakes are not climate change related, obviously, so I'm not trying to draw a parallel there. But it was an interesting thought process to have gone through to reset the way in which the Earthquake Commission ran in a public and private way. So from what you've heard and read in the report versus your own experience, does it resonate? Is there anything you might want to add? Can we give Sid the mic?
Thank you. Someone's replaced me.
Takes more than one person.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Thanks, John. The first point I'd mention, the Canterbury earthquakes, it was 95% insurance penetration, so that's a really good starting point. But there was nothing covering the sort of socio-economic impact to the city of Canterbury. Health, education, the mental health side, all the things that a community needs to be in place to function well. And it lost that. And took a long time to regather, and people leave the city. So there's a whole range of factors fall in place. And I think what this does is it focuses on giving the community the ability and the empowerment to actually play an active part in recoveries after natural disasters. And you're working together to try and learn the lessons of Canterbury between the public and private sector. One of the things we did was actually put the community at the centre and go, how can we develop the best solution for working together to deal with future disasters? And that changes the mindset, which is what I think this research has done, because it brings together, and I agree, I don't like the public-private bit, it brings together all the key players to support communities to recover. And I think that's exactly what we've done here, and that mirrors what happened in New Zealand post the Canterbury earthquakes, to be able to deal with these situations far better for the future to allow communities to recover.
Perfect.
John, can I make one point?
Of course, please.
I was thinking, one more thing that this initiative can really make happen is the true building back better. Because we did a midterm review process of the Sendai framework this year, and one thing came out, a lot of things came out, is that countries are not building back better. And one reason is they don't plan for building back better until the disaster strikes them, and that's too late. But if you do have pre-arranged financial contracts, it will give an incentive to the government to, okay, I will do this to build back better, I will use this to build back better in this way. So I think, this is also a very good mechanism for that.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Yoshi.
and maybe I could add that, and as you mentioned, Pakistan's example, and see your example, New Zealand, and Mami, you mentioned, definitely, and we are now scientific analysis going on, it's totally clear, ex ante, before the crisis, pre-finance, pre-arrangement is much, not only cost efficient, but society very much better. So we should speak out. Ex ante policies implementation is key for all this, disaster risk issue. And we should communicate very clearly, simply, but clearly to our policy makers and so on. This is extremely important responsibility for all of us.
One brief, because I'm going to close.
It's more of a request to the insurance industry for the plastic recycling. I'm in the plastic recycling industry. Similar to carbon credit, you can generate plastic recycling credit. And we need some insurance company to help us, I'm in the plastic recycling business, to help us against fraud and non-delivery by the recyclers. And if insurance company can take some initiative to start some kind of policy covers against this, the plastic recycling issue would be solved tremendously quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming. David, could I just ask you, could I give you last word on the conversation, bearing in mind it was your idea to put this report together, and you spoke with Anna and got the report going. How do you feel today with the report published and with the news coming out of the UN? How are you feeling?
I'm feeling very excited, John, because I think back to the comments that, yesterday commitments and wage loss and damage, so it is a real fund. But the reality is, it's how do you actually utilize that fund? And we've heard expressions, commitments, and then the money doesn't turn up. I really think here we've got a way of making a difference, making something actually happen. I'm a big believer that the insurance industry actually can be a force for good. I think, as Anna said, all the structures in there to do this. The capital markets will be there, but the insurance market will like this because ultimately, this is a risk that balances risk in the global north. So I think this is real and could happen. And just look at the difference it would make. And I'm a big believer in everything in empowerment. Why do people want to be rattling a betting bell after a disaster happening, hoping they're the ones getting the media attention, they're the one the money's going to go for, if it actually ever goes there rather than just being promised, rather than being empowered to know if it happens, you've got the money, you make the choices, you make the decision. Let's give them that empowerment.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Can we say thanks to our panelists, David, Mami, Yoshi, and Anna, for that wonderful report? Thanks, everybody.